Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. We appreciate everyone joining us. Welcome to the second panel of the inaugural Ohio Clean Energy Summit Local Communities Lead. Power Clean Future Ohio is proud to host the summit in partnership with the City of Cincinnati. My name is Emily Baca, and I serve as the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Ohio Environmental Council. We're proud to support the summit alongside the Ohio Mayor's Alliance and the Ohio Conservative Energy Forum and many of Pcfo's partners. We sincerely appreciate the generous support of our Ohio Clean Energy Summit sponsors, which you can see here. And today we're really excited for a conversation, a really critical conversation discussing local equitable climate solutions. How do Ohio communities advance environmental justice? We're pleased to be joined by a fantastic lineup of speakers today, including Leah D Hudnall, Director of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, Nikita Habermal, a pediatric physician at UH Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, Crystal MC Davis, Vice President of Policy and Strategic Engagement for the Alliance for the Great Lakes, and my partner in crime, Carol Davey, Managing Field Director for the Ohio Environmental Council. Rashida Manuel, Green Umbrella's Director of Public Engagement, will moderate today's panel. And Rashida, you can take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today with you and to moderate this rockstar panel that asks the question, how do communities advance environmental justice? It's an important question that I think the events of the last year, the COVID pandemic, the movement for racial justice, and the realities of inequity that both highlighted have left many of us within the environmental sustainability grappling with. We've seen communities declaring that racism is a public health crisis. We've seen numerous organizations release racial equity statements condemning racism and discrimination. But at this point, as we're seeing more and more people return to normal with accessible vaccines, nearly a year out from George Floyd's murder that ignited the movement, and with the potential investment at the federal level into climate mitigation, we're left with another question: what now? Well, our panelists today will help us answer that question. Now, before I give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and their work, I want to ground us all in a mutual understanding of what we're talking about: environmental justice. Environmental justice is the principle that all people are entitled to equal environmental protection, regardless of race, color, or national origin. It's the right to live, work, and play in a clean environment. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as lower income and working class communities, too often receive less protection from pollution and experience less enforcement of pollution laws. And the environmental justice movement works to remedy this. Now to start, I would appreciate if each one of our panelists could briefly introduce yourselves and your work, and then speak a little bit about what you see as the most pressing environmental challenges here in Ohio. So I will get started with Nikita Habermal.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rashida, for that great introduction. I'm really excited to be here with all of you and discuss this very important topic. So I am a pediatrician at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland. While I love taking care of children, I also love our environment and have been a big advocate for climate change and trying to help the local community have a better, be able to help our city become more equitable, and just discussing climate change and the effects on health, because that is my specialty, and just having that unique lens, discussing with patients and families and other colleagues as well. I think that there are important issues in Ohio that we could discuss. I think the biggest challenges that I kind of see from my perspective as a physician is a couple of things. So I think it's been challenging to speak to large corporations about using clean energy like wind and solar and switching gears to that. I also believe, like Rashida said, that it's everyone's right, all of my patients and everybody that I see, to be able to live in a vibrant, sustainable, inclusive city that has lots of tree canopies and access to healthy foods and safe places for children to walk and play. And this is, as we're going to discuss today, integral to environmental justice. And that can really be challenging at times to implement, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't work towards that goal. And lastly, I think that the other challenge I've seen is that not everybody has access to sustainable, healthy food systems, and encouraging people to buy local and eating plant-based diets is great for our climate, but again, that can be challenging. And so I think these are all important things to discuss and brainstorm ways to be able to overcome these challenges.
Thank you, Nikita. Alrighty, Crystal Davis.
Good morning. Again, I'm Crystal MC Davis. I'm with the Alliance for the Great Lakes, which is a regional organization that's been around for about 51 years, based in Chicago with 5 offices throughout the Great Lakes states. And we work on a myriad of water issues, ranging from invasive species and aquatic invasive species and agriculture and water issues to drinking water issues. And so when you talk about the most pressing environmental issues, I think it depends on which parts of the state you ask, because I think we have a number of environmental challenges facing our state, ranging from lots of water issues and air pollution and lead paint and energy issues. But from my standpoint as a water advocate, I think we have a lot of lead service line issues. We have the second highest number of lead service lines in the country. That's a growing issue. Aging infrastructure is a major issue that needs to be addressed. Water affordability is an issue, and we know that that needs to be addressed. So I think that we have no shortage of pressing issues, but right now we need to be talking about the intersection of environmental issues and how they play with other issues from other sectors. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Crystal. All right, I'll move on to Leah Hudnall.
Hello, everyone. Please excuse my voice. I'm fighting sinuses right now, but I'm Leah D Hudnall, Director of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, and I'm so excited to be here. One, because today is the day before our first grant application deadline on May 19th. And so I will use this as free promotion for everyone who is listening to encourage organizations across Ohio who are either led by a person of color or have a majority board comprised of persons of color to apply for our grant opportunity today. And you can learn more at ohioclimatejusticefund.org. But we are so happy to be a new initiative here in Ohio that is committed to investing and gaining feedback from Ohioans about conversations around clean energy and climate. And Rashida, to answer your question about the most pressing environmental issue in Ohio, is that I believe that we have so many other crises that many times Ohioans don't, one, understand they're in an environmental crisis, or two, don't have the time to address the environmental crisis that they're in until it knocks on their door with some of the issues that Nikita and Crystal, and I'm sure Carol will describe. And so one of the things that I think we all have to do is create a clear path for Ohioans to know how they can join advocacy efforts to combat some of these crises in their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty, and last but certainly not least, we have Carol Davey.
Good morning, y'all. I hope everyone is joining us in high spirits today. My name is Carol Davey. I am the Managing Field Director for the Ohio Environmental Council. The OEC has been around for 51 years, protecting the air, land, water, and democracy for all Ohioans. As Managing Field Director, I help with our field operations statewide. And then my specialty, if you will, is the just transition of Appalachia, or the transition from an extraction-based economy to local equitable economies of scale for my communities. And to answer your question, Rashida, I think the biggest environmental threat that Ohio is facing is racism. I think that we all share the same earth, we share the same planet, but as long as we continue to have white people in power not doing enough to share the planet all told, then we're going to continue to have environmental issues that impact everyone throughout the state of Ohio.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I think that was the perfect kind of segue to the next question I'd like to ask. So the question is, why do we need to have community voices centered in this work? And Carol, I think you did a great job of kind of leading us down that path, but I'd like to push us a little bit more. So why do we need to have community voices centered in the work? And how can cities, because that's who we're talking about today, or what we're talking about, how can cities approach clean energy as a community, ensuring that all community members have a voice? So I will kind of leave it open for whoever would like to jump on that one first.
Well, I'll start and offer up kind of the Appalachian perspective. A really great anecdote, if you will, is that when folks come into Appalachian communities talking about the just transition, like I mentioned, transitioning from extraction-based economies, which would be coal production, natural gas or timber, to just equitable economies of scale, they often talk about burgeoning technologies which require broadband access, which is not something that is readily available in Appalachia. So as soon as you get someone from the outside coming in to try to dictate what the next future is without getting those community voices, you're not going to create something that's actually accessible or equitable for the people that are in those communities. Because as soon as you get out of our little city centers within Appalachia, most of our rural communities would not be able to engage in that kind of advocacy or in that kind of next future for their economies.
Thank you. So that's kind of providing a baseline so that folks can even engage in the conversation to begin with.
I have a few thoughts to chime in. I would challenge those who are partnering with us today and listening in on this session to say that any effort, and it doesn't have to be environmental, but any effort without centering community voice, I believe personally is disingenuous. And so oftentimes we talk about how we're fighting on behalf of Ohioans and what Ohioans deserve and what they need. But if we are not actively and routinely, right, a drop in and a drop out isn't routine, if we're not actively and routinely engaging our communities and listening to their feedback, not just the feedback that makes us feel warm and fuzzy, but all the feedback, then we're disingenuous in our efforts. And so then many of us become just as bad character-wise as we might describe our opposition. And so I believe that centering community voice is the only way that you can go about community change, because we've seen time and time again throughout our history when the community, said community globally, has had enough, they will revolt. And so if you don't include them on the front end, you will pay on the back end.
Thank you.
Sorry, Rashida.
I'm sorry, go on.
I'd have to echo what Leah and Carol said. I completely agree. And I think that really in medicine, we use something called the needs assessment and to figure out where we can help our patients. And it's the same idea with climate change and community work. And we can't figure out what that community needs if you haven't done a needs assessment and ask the community and listen to their voices to figure out what they need. Does that community, it's going to be different here in Cleveland compared to Cincinnati. Does this community need more trees and an urban forest, or does it need more local food? It just depends. And so I think, for example, in Cleveland, we have the Climate Resilience and Urban Opportunity Plan, which allows community members to voice their opinions and discuss what their community needs. It gives an assessment of the current and anticipated effects of climate change in the Midwest, and maps Cleveland's vulnerable populations characterized by 6 factors here. And really the goal is to become energy efficient and prepare for emergencies, working alongside the city of Cleveland and the communities that live here that, like I mentioned, may be different in the South region of Cleveland versus the North region.
All righty. Crystal, would you like to answer, or would you like?
Sure, I'll jump on in. I think I'd like to echo all that was said. I think it's also important to underscore the connections and the similarities between the importance of community voice in Appalachia and in urban areas. It's important everywhere. Community is the heartbeat of the democratic process. We absolutely are missing the mark when we implement and deliberate on policies and don't have community at the table. I have a mentor that often says, let's quit talking about bringing community to the table. Let's quit talking about it, because the table was never built for community or built with community in mind anyway. Let's break the table and let's build a table that was meant for all of us, because the table wasn't even built for me. And so let's just build a new table that is meant for all of us. And so I love to quote Kim Foreman of Environmental Health Watch here in Cleveland as well. Authentic community engagement is from the ideation stage to implementation. It's not bringing community in at the end and saying, oh, how was this? We did something. We, anticipated your needs and made a whole bunch of assumptions about what you might have needed. And now we've done something. It's about saying, hey, I have an idea and I want to partner with you to try to put something together and work with you to address community priorities, and then work with you all the way through to the implementation stage. And so that is authentic community engagement. And if you're not going to do it authentically, then you will continue to miss the mark.
Absolutely. That was wonderful. And so I think what I heard you saying is that it's about using, it's about co-creating with communities, right? It's not about us going in and telling communities this is what you need, but it's about listening, co-creating, and amplifying their voices, right? All right. So this next question is really for you, Leah. You talked a little bit about the Ohio Climate Justice Fund today, but now earlier in your intro, but I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about it and how is this project working to address some of the issues that we're talking about today?
Thanks, Rashida. So the Ohio Climate Justice Fund did not start off with that name. And we definitely didn't have a firm understanding of what we wanted to do. Many of us last summer watched as kind of the racial implosion of 2020 happen right in front of our television screens and in our communities, as well as the havoc that COVID wreaked over our economy. And so what happened was philanthropic partners across the country decided that many of them were going to give above their usual 5% spending rate. And one of those philanthropic institutions was the George Gunn Foundation here in Cleveland, Ohio. They decided to give more money, and when you give more money, you have to decide how you're going to allot for that money to be used. And staff at the foundation had an idea to fund at the intersection, of climate, clean energy, racial justice, and democracy. By the time that I was engaged in this initiative, there was already a 10-person advisory board put together who had come up with a charter and a lot of other norms on what they wanted to do. And after about 9 or 10 months of partnership, we blossomed that into the Ohio Climate Justice Fund. And so this effort is here to fund organizations that usually don't receive philanthropic investment. So the Ohio Climate Justice Fund does 3 things all at once. It funds organizations that historically have been left out of the philanthropic economy. They haven't received big investments from philanthropic institutions. It also funds organizations to host community listening sessions. So there we go again with the community listening. And then it turns power back into the hands of those who are the experts. So that 10-person advisory board makes the grant decisions and not the staff of the philanthropic partners at the table. And so I think those 3 things that we're trying to do all at once, we call them our pillars, are very important because it changes the name of the game when it comes to philanthropy. My personal mantra is to take the patriarchy out of philanthropy, and I can't tell you another philanthropic initiative like this that I've seen in recent years that does all of these things at the same time. So we're really excited to announce and welcome our first grantee cohort after you all apply and we've had time to review your applications, because what we want to be able to do is to partner with organizations who may have never been able to connect all the way up in Cleveland down to Cincinnati, doing the same type of work with the same value systems, the same mission, but really have not ever been in a Zoom room or a real room to connect and share ideas. And we really want to be able to help boost up the efforts of Pcfo. How powerful will it be after a year of community conversations when we can go to a town or a metro city and say, we held 3 conversations in your city with over 200 attendees, and 60% of them have thought about choosing food over their electric bill, or they've been on a payment assistance plan with their electric bill, and this is why this issue is important in your area. I think that's going to be extremely powerful, and it's going to build even more momentum, right, for community change. So that's a little bit about the Ohio Climate Justice Fund. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that co-panelists here today, Carol and Crystal, are both on that 10-person advisory board. And you can learn more about them at the website as well. They all have bios there for you guys' consumption. And many of them have been in this work for decades plus, and they've been the grant seeker, and now they're the grant maker. And I think that's a great turn of events.
Yes, I love that. It's like creating an ecosystem so that, you're starting out with one group who can then turn around and support the next one that's coming up. And it also goes back to what Crystal was saying about kind of, amplifying the voices of communities and really supporting them and giving folks the opportunity to lead. So that's awesome. That's really awesome. Alrighty, so I will move on to our next question. This one is for you, Dr. Hudnall. Can you tell me a little bit about, and I'll start this off with you, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free to jump in. So how does our environment influence our health is where we'll start. And then kind of to take it a little bit further, how has systemic racism in our society and in our public institutions affected the environment and health of vulnerable communities?
Rashida, that's a great couple of questions, and they're all very important questions. And this is my passion, and I could literally talk about this for the entire day, but I won't do that to all of you. But just to be brief, and then of course, if the rest of the panel has things to add, that'll be great. But the environment really affects everyone's health in numerous ways. And when discussing health impacts of climate change, I really like to split it up into 6 feasible sectors. So I break it up into air quality, extreme weather events, heat-related illnesses, infectious disease, food security, and then mental health. And you can kind of look at all 6 of these areas with a specific lens and again, talk about each of them for an extended amount of time. But I really want to challenge you and your families to kind of think about how can this one specific area affect you or someone that you know, or do you think it could affect you in the future if it's not already affecting you? And so just to give a couple of examples, extreme heat events are actually the leading cause of death, environmental deaths in the US. Children are at highest risk for heat stroke or heat exhaustion, particularly athletes. There's been multiple studies to show that heat stroke has doubled compared to previous decades. There was one published in 2011 that showed that. Air quality is huge. As you can imagine, we breathe air, so it affects our lungs. And the more pollution there is, the more ozone level there is, and it puts anybody with chronic lung disease, asthma, COPD, cystic fibrosis, any of these things that you may have or you may know someone that has, they have increased exacerbations and admissions into the hospital. And this was studied in the early 2000s, and it's only getting worse. And so in 2003, 2006, there was published papers that were published at that time. There's other examples in infectious disease, vector-borne diseases such as Lyme disease. The tick replicates more at warmer climates, and it migrates with warmer temperatures. So in Ohio specifically, we're seeing increased episodes of Lyme disease, whereas in the 1990s, this was just an issue of Northeast Ohio, and now it's migrating westward into Ohio. Going into the second question, all of these sectors really affect families of lower socioeconomic status. more than other families. And thinking of like extreme weather events where you might not, you could have direct injury like wounds, but you could have indirect effect. You lose your home and you lose your job and you don't have money to go and find somewhere new to live. There's PTSD associated with this. If you see a family member or a loved one get injured, it's a huge cycle, and it's not just one thing that causes all of these effects, but it's all connected. And it's important to think about it that way rather than, oh, this is only breathing air and it's only affecting my lungs. That's not how it works. So there's lots more examples, and I have references to share as well in terms of how the environment affects our health, but that's just kind of a little taster of my perspective. And in terms of systemic racism in our society and how it affects the environment and health of vulnerable populations or communities, you know, environmental justice was kind of first discussed in like the 1960s and 70s, but I would consider going back even further to like the time of slavery, because when slaves were first freed, they were often given the worst food, the worst health care. They were given land to live on, but it was the worst land. It was next to chemical industries and close by pollution, essentially. And so it's important to kind of think about that framework and realize that this is not something that we're going to overcome overnight, and we have to work as a community to overcome all of this and create better living situations for everyone so that everyone can be healthier. There's lots of data to support this. So there is a recent paper published last year that explored the relationship between redlining and intra-urban land surface temperatures. And it actually showed that this historical housing policies may be directly responsible for disproportionate exposure to current heat events. And these communities of color live in these high-risk areas and have worse heat strokes and don't have the opportunity to be able to overcome that. I think that it's also unique to the individual cities to figure out what vulnerable communities live there. So if you're in an urban area versus a rural area, the different parts of Colorado, not Colorado, excuse me, Ohio. In 2018, Cleveland Climate Hazard and Social Vulnerability Assessment defined the factors specific to Cleveland, and that's what I'm most familiar with since I live here. And they had defined the vulnerable populations that were affected by environmental hazards were children, so less than 5 years of age, elderly, greater than 65 years of age, people who live in poverty, non-white populations that don't have a high school diploma and high housing costs, and people with disabilities, because these groups of people really have a challenging time to adapt to climate-related things. Weather events, where there's flooding, people can't evacuate if they're wheelchair bound, things like that, access to good food and access to good health care. And so just kind of having that conversation with your local community to figure out, like we've already discussed, what is the missing piece and what can we do to help close the gap is really important. I hope I answered some of those questions and are helping everyone kind of think of how that might affect their community or how their health or their community's health might be affected by environmental hazards and changes.
That was wonderful. And I think that what you did was kind of speak to the systemic nature of racism, right? And so obviously that was the question. But when you're talking about these different groups and who are experiencing this, what I think the highlight is that it's not the groups themselves that are just prone to these issues, right? That it's the underlying systems of inequality and racism that are kind of creating the conditions for the outcomes that we're seeing. And so as we're talking about, the question that we have today, what can communities do? Well, part of it is understanding that, understanding that system, and where do we come into, what is our part within that system, and how can we make an intervention from our standpoint? So thank you for that. Does anyone else want to chime in on this, or should I move on to our next question? Crystal?
I love to chime in. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic underscored the intrinsic connection between environment and public health. The first line of defense, once we heard about coronavirus, was you have to wash your hands, you have to wear your mask, and then came the cloth masks that you had to wash. And so as a water advocate, it was imperative that folks had water. And so our work shifted to really trying to advocate for a moratorium on water shutoffs, because if you didn't have water, how could you wash your hands? How could you wash your mask? How could you care for a house full of kids who were place bound now in the house and had to go to school from home, work from home, everybody in the house? And so it really highlighted this connection between public health and environment. Then layer on this environmental justice that we've been talking about. Historically disinvested, redlined, discriminated communities and the injustices that they've endured. So being next to factories and the air pollution and the health challenges that they were already experiencing. So then you have the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color. And so that's where we're talking about a physical public health outcome. But now what we're seeing is a mental and emotional outcome, because I have colleagues that are now saying, man, I had 30 people in my family pass away because of complications due to COVID. And people are like, it rolls off the tongue, disproportionate impact due to COVID, disproportionate impact, blah, 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 blah. It rolls off the tongue at this point, but when you stop and think of 30 people in her family that have been impacted, that's 30 funerals that she did not get to go to, closure that she did not have, that wears on a person. And as a person of color in a largely white dominated field, that bears its own challenges. And so I just want to lift up that so often when we talk about public health, we're talking about physical, but there are mental and emotional tolls that people are experiencing as a result of these challenges as well, that are really weighing on people in these times right now.
And I think that that's, if anything, that it's been highlighted for us is kind of the mental health toll that, this huge crisis has played on us. Carol or Leah, would you like to hop in on this or?
Yeah, I'll hop in and say, for me, this conversation isn't theoretical, it's personal impact. So I apologize in advance if this is going to get a little emotional, but when the shutdowns first happened, we did not have safe drinking water in my house, right? Where I lived in Cheshire, Ohio, historically is less than a mile away from the Ohio River, but you can't swim in it, you can't drink it. And so when we didn't have safe drinking water and I tried to go to the grocery store and everyone was panic buying everything and they shut off the refillable machines, I literally did not have a way to get my family water without driving 50 miles each way, to my sister's house to use her tap. When I was a freshman in high school, my whole town was bought by AEP because of pollution and because of the health impacts that it was causing. So my graduating class was less than 60 people. And by the time I hit 30, I can't even name for you the number of folks that I've lost to cancer or who are impacted by spina bifida or infertility. And yet we live nestled amongst all the trees, right? We were the place that everyone wanted to escape to when COVID first happened, the place that you went to outdoor recreate, yet we're the place that has all the trees, but we don't have clean air because of all the industry build out. I live in the shadows of 2 power plants that flank a river that I can't dip my toe in or bathe my children in or water my plants in because it's so toxic. And so when we're talking about the environmental health impacts of our environment, whether that's, our inner cities or our more rural areas, the problem is that we as a society have decided that there are people who can be subjugated. There are people who deserve less than, and we have given the less than to those people. And then we've taken their voice so they can't fight, and they can't ask for more. They can't ask for better. I mean, the Cheshire buyout happened in 2002 when all of the organizations that, you know, are on this call are still in existence, right? But yet we let it happen. A whole town was bought for just $20 million. And so to me, like, that is really the long game here. It is the mental health that Nikita was mentioning. You know, I can't tell you how much of a failure I felt as a mother when I couldn't find my kids fresh water, or when I couldn't figure out how we were going to stay living where we were, when we didn't have internet, so I couldn't do my job. We didn't have water we could drink, right? Like, we literally had to leave my house, had to leave my home that I have been in for decades because we could not sustain our lives there anymore. And so, like, these are real impacts, and they impact folks that you've never met, and they impact people that you see every day, but you might not know their stories. And so I want y'all to remember that, if nothing else, that everyone has a story. Everyone is coming to this work in different ways, and we've all seen these impacts. And so when you're talking to folks about what can be done next, like when we talked about centering community, that's why. If you don't get these stories, you have no idea. Emily just shared in the chat a link from the BBC about Cheshire that I mentioned. So there are folks over in England that know about my town, more so than there are folks in our own town or in Ohio that know about what happened.
Thank you for sharing that, Carol. And I think that, you know, what you're talking about is highlighting that when we talk about community engagement, it's not just kind of, Leah, I thought you talked about this earlier. It's not about just asking people, hey, what do you think about this? Or what's your input? It's about really understanding kind of what the context and what they're experiencing. And so I want to kind of pivot a little bit to think about that. What are some of the best practices that you all have implemented or seen for authentic community engagement on environmental issues that kind of really dive into getting this kind of feedback, this information from folks, that it's not just surface, but it's really allowing them to be inclusive and to share their stories and to understand kind of what they are experiencing.
I'll jump in here, Rashida. One of the things that I always encourage people to do, no matter what topic they're engaging people on, is really to speak to them in their own language, right? So for instance, there's no one in my family or my community that's like, oh, I'm going to pay my public utility bill. we just don't talk like that. And so if you engage me around a public utility survey or questions about my public utility provider, I'm less likely to respond other than you saying, hey, how high is your electric bill? Do you feel comfortable with it? Do you know who provides your electricity? You know, those type of questions. And so I think sometimes we come in, we as in advocates, academics, people representing institutions, we come into community that we're not there a lot, right? So we are the anomaly, we're the outsider. We come into their home and we talk at them. We don't engage them in a conversation with us. And then we get upset when we don't get the responses we need for our institution survey, our institution's project. And so one of the things that I always encourage is for just accessible conversation, and then no assumptions, right? Because environmental justice is not new to the communities you're going to engage. They created it. You have to be resilient in the face of century-long injustice, right? And so whether or not they can give you the latest on the FBI probe on, you know, certain folks in Ohio, I bet you they could tell you how to sustain themselves in a 5-mile radius, right, with fresh food. Maybe in a community that doesn't have a grocery store in their town or within miles within their home. So I think what we always have to do is check ourselves at the door or check ourselves at the driveway before we approach a community member, and really understand that as Carol has stated and the other co-panelists, we don't know anyone's story, right? And I hear Dr. Nikita on, you know, the 6 areas related to environmental effects and all of these things, but social determinants of health. We live in a state that has cities where you could be in one area with a life expectancy that's 20 years above someone just 2 miles down the road. Now, why is that legal? Why is that okay? Why haven't we seen, you know, why aren't we all in an uproar? And many of that goes back to some of the very issues we're talking about. And so I just truly believe that if I do nothing else today in this conversation with all of you dynamic folks, is that we all have to stress that we are not more important than the people that we serve. we are not more educated. We do not have more lived experience. You know, those are the people. We are just in these roles to be community translators, right? To get the information and give it back and get the lived experience from them and push it back to where it needs to be heard at the State House. Other than that, we're just here, right, as servants. And so I really strongly believe those values.
I don't really want to follow the incomparable Leah, but I will add in here and say that I also think it's about intersectionality. I don't believe that there's anything that is just an environmental issue. And I think that approaching environmental work, thinking that environmentalism is hugging a tree, is doing a disservice to you, your funders, your members, and everyone involved. Environmentalism impacts everything and vice versa, right? We can't ever just approach issues anymore thinking that it's just one thing or in a silo. We go into communities a lot of the times who are deciding how to pay bills, how to feed their family, and you want to talk to them about how to recycle or how to install solar. And that's a very long game, but they want to know how to survive right now, right? And that's part of environmentalism. And it's part of knowing that people are part of the environment. And I don't mean that to sound pithy, but sometimes we forget that. We go after the big numbers, the metrics, and we forget that the people inhabiting this planet are important too, and that their lives are important, and that their stories are important as well. So I think that's my big one is environmentalism isn't just about hugging a tree. It's about making sure a mom can, you know, give safe water to her kids, and that life expectancy isn't 20 years difference by 2 blocks, because that's just criminal.
I'll echo everything that was said. I think you can't say it any better. I wrote a report with the Alliance for the Great Lakes a few years ago that's on our website, greatlakes.org. Step 1 is shut up and listen. That's how we title reports at our org. Let's just keep it real. Step 1 is shut up and listen. Quit making assumptions. You don't have to guess. Just shut up and listen to them. Listen to the community. And quit polling them and think that you don't have to pay them. And so just shut up and listen to them, be authentic, pay them stipends. Nobody wants that crudité. Don't come up in the community with your carrots and your ranch. We don't want that. Full dinner. And treat the community right. And so develop some principles of engagement. If you don't know where to start with the JEMEZ principles, JEMEZ, for those that have never heard the words. Just start there, look it up, and really have some metrics or some principles that you want to govern yourself by, to have some accountability to yourself in terms of how you want to govern yourself in collaboration with community. You are not going to try to amplify community in a way where you want to take their stories and tell their stories. Our job is to pass the mic to the community so they can tell their own stories. That's the role of advocates, activists. And so I think step 1 is shut up and listen. And the report that I haven't written is step 2 is to act on what you heard. Because it's not okay to just listen and then walk away like, oh, that was great. We heard some stuff and we're just gonna walk away with this new knowledge and let it just sink in. No, you act on what you heard. Everything that I heard from the community conversations that I had in Northeast Ohio in 2017 have been incorporated into our list of priorities. The entire drinking water portfolio that is of the Alliance for the Great Lakes was an outgrowth of the listening sessions that we had with communities in Cleveland. We heard from them and they said, water affordability. I don't care nothing about Asian carp. That's what they said in Cleveland. The people in Chicago care. That is still a priority for our organization, but our message changes based on who we are engaging. And so because they care about drinking water issues and that's a priority and that's their connection to the Great Lakes, their source of tap, that's now a priority for our organization. So we've acted on what we heard. That is authentic community engagement. That is how you build relationship with community.
That's literally perfect. I really don't have much to add, but it really comes down to three things that everybody on the panel has said. Listen, act on what people said, and no one's better than anyone else. We are a community in Ohio, no matter where you live, and nobody is smarter or better. Everybody has their own path, and they're all intertwined, and we have to work together as a community to advance as a community. Nobody can do anything alone. And so I think it's huge. You have to listen to what your communities are saying, and then you have to act on it. And as an example, my patients were saying that they didn't have access to healthy foods. They lived in a food desert. They could go to the gas station and get chips, but no kid's brain is going to develop on just chips. And so we listened, and we were able to work with local farmers to get local fresh produce and provide it in our clinic to our families. And it used to be in the waiting area, and they would have access to fruits and vegetables and fresh food. And who did that benefit? Local farmers. It didn't have a negative impact on climate change by adding to the greenhouse gases because we weren't shipping it across the nation. It affected our families who finally had access to good, healthy foods, and not just our families, all of our staff, the MAs, the nurses, the doctors, everybody got access. We aren't better than anyone. We all get to have good, healthy food, and it's meant for everybody. It's not meant for one person who lives 2 miles away that has a higher life expectancy. That's not fair, and that's not how it should be. And so we really have to listen to our communities, our families, and hear what they have to say to be able to make these changes.
Okay. Thank you all. Someone in the comments said that this particular portion of the conversation was fire. So, and I would agree. And Carol, you were right. I do want that shirt that from what you said, Crystal. We don't want your crudité. That's it. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit here in the last few minutes to talk about jobs. So one key theme emerging of late is that climate means jobs. So how do we ensure economic growth and clean energy doesn't further perpetuate the divestment and economic disparities faced by Black and Brown communities and communities in Appalachia? Carol,
I got it. It's because it's my first Zoom ever, apparently, and I forgot to unmute my phone.
Okay.
All right, so what I was going to say was, as the example that I mentioned earlier about listening to communities, right? So in Appalachia, I'm not going to go into the whole history of our economy and coal, but now know that the burgeoning industry is natural gas. And natural gas does not come with the same place-based economic base as coal even did, right? So natural gas is something that people travel with the pipeline. So you don't get that sense of community, and you definitely don't get those dollars. And so as we're thinking of new careers or new jobs, climate change mitigation does mean jobs. It means jobs, but it also means that these jobs need to be accessible for communities, right? I don't ever want to tell a past coal miner who was making $40 an hour to please go install some solar panels and you'll make 17. And I don't want to create a database hub in Southeast Ohio where we don't have great broadband internet, and so there's not jobs to be had, right? So I think that, to me, when we're talking how to do climate change mitigation or how climate means jobs, it's that, one, we have to think out of the box. Two, I think what Crystal said earlier is completely correct. You got to go and you got to talk to the community, and you have to pay them. You cannot be extractive. You cannot go and ask them their thoughts and not give them anything in return time and time again. Three, you have to remember that you're getting paid. Most of the people listening into this conversation get paid to do their work here. Most of the people that you're going to talk to do not get paid to do work. They're doing it because it's their passion, it's their livelihood, and it's literally their life, right? And so you need to approach it with a bit of respect and know that this is their free time. But when we're talking jobs, we need to make sure that the jobs that we are offering are accessible to everyone, that there are jobs that come in a host of reliabilities, right? Like, you don't need to have a master's degree in engineering to pick up a job, but it also has to be a job that's going to pay you well enough to build a family and build a life where you are. And it can't be a job that is short-sighted. It can't be something that is just oh, well, we're going to create 10,000 jobs cleaning up the Wayne National Forest for a year, and then we'll see y'all later. So I think that there are hundreds of thousands of people around the country trying to figure this one out. But I know that for me, and especially for Appalachia, Reimagine Appalachia is a really great new emerging policy priority. So if someone can put that into the chat, that'd be really wonderful. But they have a lot of information about how you can use climate change mitigation for economic bolstering of Appalachia, but it's specifically jobs.
Rashida, I really believe that before we have the conversation about the new green economy or, clean energy jobs that are coming, we need to center the experience of how most of us, especially here in Northeast Ohio, and I can only speak for myself, I'm a 4th generation Clevelander, and I know that I was fed from a petrochemical plant pension that I still can, tap into if I guess I ever need some money from the parents and the great grandparents, right? And so for Black Americans, many who migrated to these metropolitan cities strictly for the steel economy that was here, right? So in Cleveland, they redeveloped a whole part of the town. It's called Steelyard. Now it's like a retail area, but you can still see the infrastructure and the bones and the skeleton of what was, right? Where my great grandfather worked. The environmental horror stories, they didn't know then of what they were doing and how they were depositing their waste into some of our nature's resources, which led to a huge fire that you might have heard about, right? And so I think that when we talk about this, we have to then put it in context to the fact that we know that those jobs did a lot of harm to our environment, but we don't consider that they boosted an entire generation into a new economic class. So you can't go in demonizing the industry that fed and mobilized Black men and women and got them into homes that they're still into, right? And got them into different opportunities that without that income they may not have gotten. But what I tend to do when I'm having these conversations, it's a very basic conversation, and say, but think about how much you sacrificed your physical health, right? Of all the men that you work with, if there were 10 men, there's only 2 now, right? And many of them die from different cancers and things because they exposed themselves and sacrificed their bodies literally to make that economic leap. And so I think the conversation should be, no longer should we have to decide whether we want to shave time off of our life expectancy or be able to sustain ourselves in this American capitalist society, right? And so if we start from there, then I think you can then start to engage people on like, okay, well, we see our current administration talking about this. We know that this is an issue. We can see the effects climate change is having here in Ohio, right? We're not even one of the high effect states, but we can see it. And so when you can engage people and say, we know what granddad did, we know what dad did, we know what great granddad did, and we're not demonizing that, but we're trying to evolve. Just as time evolves, so does economies and job opportunities. And so I just wanted to offer that because I think sometimes that perspective is lost, that all people don't look at it as the big evil, dollar that it was.
Thank you, Leah. Well, we are kind of coming up on the end of our discussion today. I want to leave us off, though, with one last question. And if you all could take just a couple seconds, more than a couple seconds, we have a couple minutes left, but take a little bit of time to answer this question, that would be wonderful. So the question is, BIPOC communities are situated at the nexus of a variety of movements for justice. So we're talking, obviously, racial justice, reproductive justice, restorative justice, economic justice. These are just to name a few. There's so many other than those. So how do we approach communities regarding kind of environmental justice with an understanding of the greater context? And Leah, you touched on this a little bit earlier. How do we approach them understanding that there are all of these other issues also happening at the same time?
So I think we said bits and pieces through the whole panel. right? But I think it really is not treating anything like a silo, understanding the intersectionalities of all of the issues, and understanding that when people are making a choice around their survival, their families, and how to afford their lives, sometimes your issue is going to be at the bottom of the list. And if you can't figure out how to make your issue more important, how it ties in with the other factors that are causing them stress or causing them issues, then that's your fault, right? You should be able to understand your issue enough to know how it impacts all across the spectrum. So that to me is the biggest one. If you're going into a community and it feels like, you know, that there are so many things going on, then it's your job to figure out how your issue really plays into all of those intersecting social issues.
I'll add to that, saying that I think that one of our opportunities is to build a multi-sector, diverse coalition that with advocacy messages that resonate with various constituencies. That's just something that we're gonna have to do if we want to build the political will to win in Ohio on anything. We know that we need to be able to address both sides of the aisle and multiple sectors. And so part of that is being able to go to other sectors and talk and be able to have conversations and identify synergies between both of us. And that's even with community. And so that is having those conversations. And sometimes the synergy boils down to a value. It may not be a direct, okay, this is absolutely the same policy that we both care about. It may be a value, but it's about having those conversations to identify those synergies and then building upon those things. I can absolutely know that there are synergies in my water advocacy with the business community, with the health community, with the education community, and there's power in leveraging those things. And so until we can do that and get all of us together to speak with a unified voice on these things, and we're not going to be able to build the political will to win. And so I think that's where the power is.
Thank you. Go on, Dr. Hudnall.
That's okay. I think I was just going to add, I agree with everything so far, but I think the thing to remember is that we're a team. Nobody has to do this alone. And Rashida, all of those movements for justice that you discussed are all important, and it's all a circle. Nothing is linear. And we're a team. We can take steps forward to approach certain aspects of it, and it will affect other areas, and we can make changes. The only thing in life that's guaranteed is that something's going to change. Nothing stays the same forever. And so I think that we really have to approach it in a team approach, and know that taking one step forward will affect something else. It can be good or bad, but it doesn't mean that it's forever. And that it can be overwhelming if we just try and take this on as a solo person. We can't do that. And so it's a lot of really great issues we've talked about today, and none of this has to happen alone. And we have to just be able to listen and help make change, and know that that's going to be okay.
Yes, I don't have any groundbreaking information to add to these three great comments. The only thing I'll say is that if we look at this work on a spectrum, right, I think we'll all be better off. And I think many of us do already view it that way. But I find great value in knowing when it's my turn to take the mic and when it's my turn to pass the mic, right? And for different audiences, different voices will ring truer. And so if we can all begin to practice, it may not be my stage, but it may be Crystal's stage, it may be Carol's stage, and maybe it's just my job is just to set it up and, twist the mic and make sure everything's in place for them to speak their truth. And then they'll do the same for me when it's my time. And I think if we can continue to do that and co-advocate, right? We don't all have to lead the charge. And I know part of this I do put on philanthropy, because philanthropy forces you to have deliverables about how you're going to lead, how your specific organization is going to lead the charge in 1 year, 11 months after they give you the announcement that you got the grant, right? And how you're going to change the world in 10 to 11 months, right? And have clear metrics on how you're going to do it in 3 deliverables. And so I think if we start to move our advocacy beyond the grant deliverables and, kind of the biennial budget and all these different things, we will start to realize some success.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. Turn it over to Joe.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rashida. And what an incredible conversation and a really powerful way to start our day. So thank you to all of the panelists for participating today. I want to highlight one important resource that Power Clean Future Ohio recently launched related to this conversation, which is available at any Ohio city. It's called the Pcfo Equity Coaching for Sustainable Cities program, which you can find on our website, powercleanfuture.org. So please visit and check it out. It's an opportunity for your local government officials to engage in a community conversation with a provided equity coach on what are the racial and economic disparities your community is facing, and how can they address and reform the policies, programs, and policies as part of your local government. So please check that out when you have a chance. Once again, thank you so much for the panelists for participating today and sharing your expertise with our audience. If you'd like to learn more about some of the resources mentioned today, please visit powercleanfuture.org/summit-resources, which there'll be a link in the chat to see that. I'd like to extend an extra special thank you to Rashida Manuel from Green Umbrella, an organization based in Cincinnati and a close partner of ours. We wish we could be in Cincinnati with you this week as we intended to be, but we're excited to highlight our host city throughout the week and appreciate your support for what we're doing across Ohio. If you're not already registered for our other panels, we have one more left that's tomorrow and Thursday's big event. We're dropping a link in the chat now for you now. We hope to see you at tomorrow's panel on clean energy in your city's budget, which should be another really fascinating discussion. That panel starts at noon. Our marquee event on Thursday is at 10 a.m. featuring a spectacular lineup of speakers. And then we'll be sure to follow up from this event and the marquee event on Thursday with recordings and resources from our week of events. So thanks again for tuning in this morning. Hopefully it was a really powerful discussion to start your Tuesday, and have a great week.